So last Sunday was Easter, as most of you know. And after service was over, we went home and we had lunch with, it was my family, so myself, Vanessa, Brooklyn, Mason, Gavin. My mom came over, and then my uncle came over, my mom's brother. And we were sitting around the table, we were having dinner, when a story began to happen that caught us all off guard. My 10-year-old son, actually 9-year-old son, who then turned 10 the next day, began to tell a story about a time that he was assaulted in the bathroom at school. And it was a story that we had not heard before. And so he begins to talk about how a few months ago, he was at school and he told a joke in the bathroom to another kid. Now, it's a harmless joke. In fact, it's so harmless, it's the first joke that I taught my children, okay? It's the knock knock, who's there? Seymour, I'm not gonna finish it because I'm on a if you don't know the joke, ask someone else because most people know the joke. I taught this to my kids when they were like 2. Like as soon as they could speak, I taught them that joke, okay? And I don't know what that says about me as a human or as a dad, but I think it's great. So he tells the joke to this kid. Apparently the kid is super offended by the joke and proceeds to pick Mason up, who for those of you who don't know Mason, Mason's tiny. Mason's real little. Picks Mason up and according to Mason, body slams him to the ground in the bathroom at school. Now, there are 2 kinds of parents in the world. There are the parents who are like, life's tough, ignore him. And there are the types of parents who are like, I'll kill the kid, all right? I'm not gonna comment on which one is which in our parenting dynamic. You guys can figure that out for yourselves. But there were some feelings that were happening at the table. So we begin to ask questions because again, we've not heard this story. This seems like a big deal, right? So okay, so how long ago did this happen? I don't know, a few months ago. Okay. Did you tell anyone? Well, no, my friend stepped in. As soon as he slammed me to the ground, my friend stepped in and was like, don't you ever do that to my friend Mason. And then he pushed the kid and then okay, so there's another kid involved? Yes, there's another kid involved. So did anybody tell an adult? Well, yeah, I think my friend told one of the adults because a couple days later, the next day, a guy came to my classroom and pulled me out of class to ask me about it. What guy? I don't know. Now, Mason is the funniest of our 3. The problem with Mason being the funniest of our 3 is sometimes we don't know if what he's saying is accurate. He likes to embellish and he likes to make things funnier sometimes. And he kind of always has this look on his face like he's up to something. So it's hard. So we're like, listen, bud, okay, did this really happen? Yes, this really happened. Why didn't you tell us about it? Well, I did. No, you didn't. Okay, so Mason, are you sure this happened? Because one of the parents was like, because I'm calling the school tomorrow. And I'm gonna find out why I wasn't notified about this. And he's like, yes, I promise, I swear it really happened. So we break and we do a couple of other things and we eat dessert and eventually we're back around the table again and my mom looks at my uncle. Now my uncle is, he's never been married, he doesn't have kids. He's a little bit socially awkward, but he is very, 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 very smart. Just really smart guy. He's kind of always in his head, he's kind of always thinking. And my mom looked at my uncle and said, so what do you think of the story? And he sat there for a second and he said, there are holes. Now, we have come to find out that apparently this did happen, but the principal was not aware of it. That's not the point of the story though. Everything's good, I want you to know that. No kids were murdered. We don't yet, Vanessa said. She just gave away who is who. It was a really interesting experience, and it was fascinating to hear my uncle say, well, there are holes. Certain things in our lives elicit doubt, right? To hear your 10-year-old who is prone to amplify details of stories to get a laugh, to hear him tell a story like that it made us doubt a little bit. Doubt is an interesting thing, and the series that we're going into now for today and the next 3 weeks is centered around doubt, and it's a really, really important topic. Because if you have been a Christian for any period of time in your life, you have experienced doubt. It may have happened because there was somebody that you loved, that you cared about, who got sick, and you prayed fervently prayed, like every night on your knees, begging God to heal the person, and he didn't. It may be because there's someone you care about in your life who knew God and then walked away from God at some point because they got hurt, they experienced pain at the hands of people, and they walked away from their faith. Or maybe they just walked away from it because they got to this place where they thought, I'm not sure about all this, and they experienced doubt, and then you prayed and prayed, and God hasn't brought that person back. Maybe it's just that you're a person who's analytical, and maybe you have looked at some of the details in the Bible and been like, I don't know about all this. I mean, some of it, like, okay, but other parts, man. The reality is we all struggle with doubt at some point in time. And the problem happens when that doubt becomes so loud that we can't shut the doubt down, and when we don't know what to do with it. And unfortunately, I think this is an important topic because the church, not City North per se, but the church broadly has done some damage. And when I say that, what I mean is there are a lot of churches that look at doubt as a problem, that fundamentally view doubt as something that needs to go away. And so sometimes well-meaning Christians and well-meaning churches will do really significant damage by saying things like, well, you just need to have more faith when you voice your doubt. Or maybe they'll say things like, well, the Bible says it, and so you just need to believe it. Or maybe they say things like, well, God's got this all under control, so don't worry. And in the worst of cases, people will say things like, you really shouldn't doubt at all. The problem is when that is what is communicated by Christians, by churches, by spiritual leaders, what it does is force you down a road of stuffing the doubt. And in my pretty extensive at this point experience with people in a ministry context. I mean, my kids like to say that I'm older than I am, and that's fine. Brooklyn likes to say I'm a boomer, and I'm literally not. I'm not even close. She likes to tell people that I'm almost 50, which is, she's a decade off, okay? To be clear. She thinks it's hilarious, and I'm like, that's fine. I can't wait till you're that age, and I'll say all the same things to you. I've been in full-time ministry for almost 2 decades. And in my experience, the problem is that when you learn that doubt is something to be stuffed away, when it's something to just shove to the side and pretend it's not real, what tends to happen is there comes some point in time where something happens in your life and then it amplifies that doubt. And then maybe another thing happens that amplifies it even more. And then another thing. And what I have witnessed more often than not is people get to this place where they realize, or they learn that doubt is a bad thing, they shouldn't have it. And so they try to pretend it's not real until it's too big to ignore anymore. And by the time it's too big to ignore anymore, sometimes it's too late. I experienced this. This is a deeply personal and significant topic for me because I was a youth pastor for a lot of years, and a lot of kids that I was the youth pastor for in that time, a lot of them have walked away from faith. Not only that, but I've like friends and family members. A few years back, there was a very close friend of mine, someone I'd known for years and years and years, who started coming to City North, and when they started coming here, and I'm talking, I'd known this person for 30 plus years. When they started coming to City North, they were here for a few weeks, and then at one point they said, hey, can we get together? I want to talk about some stuff. And they came in that week, and we sat down in the pews at the time, and they proceeded to lay out this very long story of all this pain that they had endured in the church, and how they had taken the pain to people they trusted, and they had told them that they needed to quit worrying about it all, and that they were just being dramatic, and that they needed to just move on. And that began to lead them down a road of questioning everything the Bible said, because ultimately these were people they respected, and they kind of got to this point where they were like, well, if they could be that uncaring, then is anything they're saying even true? And by the time we started to talk about things, I realized very, very quickly that the questions that they had were so big, they were so all-encompassing, that they had already lost their faith and they didn't even know it yet. And there was really nothing I could do. In fact, at one point during the conversation, I looked at them and I was very emotional because this is someone I love very deeply. And I looked at them and I said, I wish you would have come to me years ago. Because every question you're asking me, I think there's a legitimate answer to. But at this point, you already have decided what the answers are. And I don't know that we can get you back where you need to be. And as it turned out, a few weeks later, they stopped coming and they wholesale have rejected their faith. And so this is something that's deeply personal to me. Because in my life, I know what it is to doubt. And maybe that's something that a lot of pastors wouldn't admit, but you guys mostly know me. I'm not going to pull any punches. I've doubted a lot of things in my life. Like many of you, there are moments where I'll be sitting around and doing something and a thought will race through my mind, right? And what if everything you've given your life to is a load of garbage? What if it's all false? Like, I have those thoughts. Now, I don't dwell in those thoughts, but I have those thoughts. But on a practical level, there's plenty of things that I doubt. I mean, I love this church, and I love the journey that God has taken us on, but I would be lying through my teeth if I said that it has been easy. It has been the hardest thing we've ever done by a mile. And there are times where I sit down still and I pray and I ask God, why did you ask me to do this? Did I mishear you? Did I misunderstand? Was this all like, because I don't know that I'm in the right spot anymore. I remember when my dad died, my kids were, this was 3.5 years ago, so Brooklyn was like 7.5, something like that. And they got home from school, and we knew that my dad was going to pass within the next day or two. This was kind of as COVID was over, but hospitals were still really cautious, and they wouldn't let kids into the ICU, and so my kids hadn't been able to go see him. And they got home from school, and we had to tell them that their pop was going to die. And Brooklyn was very, very close with my dad. And she started sobbing. And she said, but Daddy, I prayed that God would heal him. And if you've ever experienced any kind of loss, you know that feeling of, but God didn't do what I thought. God didn't do what I expected. And what do you do with those doubts? And when you're taught to stuff them, what can end up happening is what happened to my friend. They can get so big under the surface that they end up destroying you. But in my journey, what I've learned is that there's a different road, and that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at two roads that doubt can lead you down. Because there are two roads. And then for the next few weeks, what we're going to do is explore how to make sure you choose the right road. Now, doubt is an interesting thing too, because it is all over the Bible. You may not realize that, but it is all over the place in the Bible. In fact, the very first place that doubt shows up is in the 3rd chapter of the Bible. I love teaching from the early part of Genesis, from the creation accounts. And some of you are probably like, you're really going to go back to Genesis 3? I am. Yes, I am. And I'll probably go back again in a couple months because it's so foundational to understanding the entire narrative of the Bible. And so at this point, what we have learned in the biblical narrative is that God has created all things. He created people, and he put us in this garden. And in the garden, he planted trees everywhere. But there's one tree, he says, don't eat out of it. And he says, if you eat from that tree, you will surely die. And it's at that point, as Genesis chapter 3 kicks off, that our spiritual enemy enters the scene. And I want you to notice the very first thing the enemy says. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say, you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, well, we can eat from all the trees in the garden, but God did say, don't eat fruit from that tree in the middle of the garden, and don't touch it. If you do, you will die. And the response, you're not going to die. What's really happening here is that God knows if you eat it, your eyes are going to be opened and you're going to be like him. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want that. Well, what's the tactic that the enemy uses? He tries to introduce doubt. The very first thing that happens in the battle between good and evil in the Bible is that the enemy tries to introduce doubt. When God created Adam and Eve, there was nothing between them. There was just trust. There was faith. And it was built on a very simple reality. God created us. He loves us. He wants what's best for us. And in this moment, Satan tries to get Eve to believe God doesn't actually want what's best for you. He's actually trying to keep something from you. And that leads down all kinds of ugly roads. And I think it's important to understand that from the very beginning of the biblical narrative, we see that the enemy tries to introduce doubt into the minds of people because he knows something very, very significant. Satan knows that there's a road that doubt leads down, one of the roads, and that is a road to destruction. The truth is that doubt can lead to a destruction of faith. It can. Doubt can lead to a destruction of faith. Satan knows that. And so Satan in our own lives, he did it with Adam and Eve, he does it with us. The number one thing that he will try to do to derail your faith is introduce doubt. If he tells you bold-faced lies, things that don't make any sense, we're all smart people. We'll be like, that's not true. But if he can introduce something that maybe makes sense to us and that causes us to doubt that what God has said is true, now he's got something he can do with us. The tactic of our enemy is doubt. If he can introduce doubt, there's now a crack in the foundation. And if then he can introduce a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, at some point in time when you walk down that road, it leads to destruction. And that's what ultimately happens with Adam and Eve. Eve believes what the serpent says, and she doubts at that point, and she goes and eats the fruit and then gives some to Adam, and he eats, and their relationship with God is broken. It led to a destruction of their faith. Instead of simply saying, we believe what God said is true, they started to believe maybe it's not, which led down a road to destruction. And so you've got to understand as we start this series off that there are two roads. The one road, the first road is that doubt can lead to a destruction in your faith. It can. I worded that in a very important way, and if you're a note taker, you might want to circle the word can, because it matters a whole lot. Just a few chapters later in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 17, there's an account of another person, a man named Abraham. His story actually begins several chapters earlier, and it's a fascinating story. God appears to this man named Abraham, and he says that he's going to give him a land and he's going to bless him, and he's going to make his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand and the seashore. And he says, listen, your family, you're going to be my people, and I'm going to be your God, and I'm going to make you a blessing to the entire world. I am going to bless you immeasurably, and you're going to bless the whole world. And Abraham's like, that sounds great, but there's a problem. I don't have any sons. So, also, I'm like 85, God. How are we gonna work this out? And God says, don't you worry, you're gonna have a son. And Abraham's like, okay. Well, Abraham goes back and tells his wife, and as you might imagine, she laughed. Fast forward 5 years. Fast forward 10 years. Fast forward 15 years. No son. But God keeps intermittently showing up to Abraham and saying, hey, remember that promise? It's going to happen. All the while, I imagine that Abraham grows more and more doubtful. In fact, there's one particular place in Genesis chapter 17, verse 17. It says Abraham fell face down. This is right after God told him the promise again. And he laughed. And he said to himself, is a son going to be born to a man 100 years old? My wife, she's 90. Is she? Because what else do you do at that point but laugh? Now, here's the thing. It's a very small moment in the narrative, but it's a moment of doubt, isn't it? Be my response. Listen. My wife sometimes is insane, okay? It's okay, you can laugh at that. To be clear, I never say anything from this stage that I've not said to her. She would like more children. Oh, hard pass. And listen, children are an incredible blessing. We were talking about it a few weeks ago, and she'll bring it up every few months or something, like, are you sure? I was like, Vanessa, let's just do some math real quick. If we get pregnant right now, if we wait 9 months, have the baby, if all goes perfectly, I'm gonna be 59 years old when that kid graduates from high school. No, thank you. Now, there's nothing wrong with parents who are parents, nothing wrong with it. I don't want that. I'm already really, really tired. And I'm tired because I have 3 kids who steal all of my energy. And they're amazing and wonderful, and they are the greatest gift God ever gave us. But there's not one iota of me that wants another kid. And it is what it is. She still does, I don't. God's got to work on my heart if it's ever going to happen. He hasn't yet. And so we'll get there. No, we won't. Now, God has blessed us. It's been amazing. And I know that there are many, many people in the world who have not been able to experience that blessing. And so I don't mean to make light of that. But what I am trying to say is that kids are a lot of doggone work. They're exhausting. I mean, I'm 39 years old, and my kids have me like, all I want to do is take a nap. I mean, pretty much 24/7, I just want to take a nap. He's 100 years old. His wife is 90 years old. What else would you do but laugh? Like, okay, God, oh boy. So, yeah, I'm not sure, but if you say so, I guess we'll see what happens. He laughs. He doubts. Does he doubt in a way that feels like serious and heavy? No, he's laughing about it, but that's doubt. Abraham is doubting that God is going to pull off the thing that at this point he's been saying for 15 years. I mean, it would have been one thing for that to happen at 85 when Sarah was 65. Now they're 190 years old between the two of them. I mean, there's no way. And so Abraham laughs and he doubts. But here's the thing. It's not the end of the story. As it turns out, what God had said to Abraham this time around was within a year, you're going to have your son. And shortly after that, Sarah became pregnant and she had a baby. Abraham had his son. He had the pathway to a promise. But then what happened was later on, when Isaac was probably about 15 years old, God appeared to Abraham again and he said, Abraham, I want you to go to the top of the mountain. And when you get there, I'll tell you what to do. And so Abraham, being a faithful man of God, he goes up the mountain and he does what God said. He takes Isaac with him, but no animal for the sacrifice. They get to the top of the mountain and God says, Abraham, I want you to sacrifice Isaac. I want you to kill your son for me. And it's this really kind of crazy moment in the Bible because God had been promising Abraham this one thing all this time. Abraham waited 15 years for the promise. He did do some really dumb things in the midst of it that he shouldn't have done, but he waited for the promise. He received the promise, but then Isaac was the way the promise could actually happen. Without Isaac, God can't bless him in the way that he said he would. And so why would God ask for Isaac as a sacrifice? Now for us, child sacrifice is an abomination. 4,000 years ago, it was a different animal. And in this moment, Abraham has a choice to make. And the choice that Abraham makes is to trust God, which I imagine was in part because of the fact that God had already given him a son at 100 years old, and that didn't make sense. So if God could do that, then maybe God could do something else miraculous too. And so Abraham begins to prepare to sacrifice his son, and just as he's about to finish the act, an angel of the Lord stops him and says, Abraham, you've proven yourself faithful. Do not sacrifice your son Isaac. Look, there's a ram right there caught in a thicket. Take the ram. The ram will be your sacrifice. Now, that's a crazy story for us as parents. Thank goodness that God does not ask for those kind of things anymore. And if he does, don't listen. It's not God, okay? In that moment, Abraham had to wrestle with the doubt that he had had, but the doubt that he had come to a place of firm faith. In fact, later on in the Bible, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 years later, somewhere in that ballpark, there's a book called Hebrews that is written. This is in the New Testament. And there's one chapter of Hebrews, chapter 11, that walks through what faith is. And the first verse says, faith is being certain of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And then it goes on and it lists out all these heroes of faith throughout the Old Testament narrative. And one of the very first ones that it lists is Abraham. And this is what the writer of Hebrews has to say about Abraham. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. In other words, it's through Isaac that the promise is going to come to pass. But Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. So in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. In other words, Abraham's faith was so firm at this point that he trusted that even if God did have him kill Isaac, he would do something. He would do something to bring the promise to pass. Now that's an incredible amount of faith, but rewind 15 years and Abraham's laughing at the promise of God. And so when I look at this narrative, and by the way, I could have picked dozens of different stories of heroes of the faith in the Bible who all experienced similar kind of things. When I look at Abraham's story, when I look at the way that he laughed at God saying, you're going to have a son at the age of 100. When I look at Sarah's response, she laughed. When I look at that and then I read Hebrews and go, well, but wait, Abraham doubted. So clearly, yes, there is a road where doubt leads to destruction, but clearly there is also a road where doubt can lead to the deepening of our faith. It can, because it did. It did for Abraham. It did for David. It did for Joshua. It did for Moses. It did for so many different heroes of our faith. Yes, there are examples of doubt leading down a road to destruction, but there are also example upon example upon example upon example in the Bible of doubt leading to a deepening of faith. This place where all of a sudden God proves himself to us in our doubt, and then we're able down the road to be able to have greater faith because of the doubt we experience. Not in spite of it, but because of it. So there are two roads. Doubt can lead to the absolute destruction of our faith. It can. But doubt can lead to the deepening of our faith. It can. And for some of you, you just need to hear that. And you don't need to hear anything else in this entire message series, because you in your entire life have never heard a spiritual leader say, it's okay if you have doubt. It's okay. It's okay. Your doubt doesn't make you less human or less spiritual. It makes you human. Your doubt does not make you less faithful to God. It makes you human. And I don't know a human in all of human history that had no doubt. In fact, I would even argue that Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, as he expresses to God the Father in prayer and says, Father, if there be any other way, let this cup pass from me, it would take some convincing to make me think that Jesus didn't have doubt in that moment. I think there was doubt. But that doubt led Jesus down a path that was good. I know that Jesus' disciples, after he rose from the dead, some of them really doubted. In fact, one of them has become known as Doubting Thomas, because even as he looked at the resurrected Christ, he was like, I don't know about all this. Because wouldn't you? And he said, until I feel the nail marks in his hands, I won't believe. And so what did Jesus do? He appeared to Thomas and said, here, touch. Not only that, some of the final words Jesus spoke in Matthew chapter 28 are known as the Great Commission. where Jesus says, now go into all the world and make disciples of all the nations, teaching them to baptize you, teaching them to obey everything I commanded you, and baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. But do you know what the text says right before that? It says, just as Jesus was preparing to ascend, there were many gathered around him, but some doubted. Because of course they did. People don't raise from the dead. We watched him be crucified. And even within that doubt, as his closest friends and some others are there and they're looking at the resurrected Christ, there are some that are like, I can't wrap my head around this. And what did Jesus do? Did he say, hey, those of you who have doubt, just get on out of here? No, he gave them the same commission he gave to the ones who had faith. Because doubt does not have to be a road that leads to destruction. Doubt does not have to be a road that leads to the death of faith. Doubt does not have to be something that tears it all apart. Doubt can be something that leads to the deepening of your faith, to the development of your faith, something that leads to stronger and greater faith in the end. And I don't just know that because the Bible told me so. I know that because from about January of 2014 until about the end of 2014, I walked through a season of tearing apart everything I believed about God. Because of the pain that I had experienced, the things that I had been through, I never stopped believing in who God was. And we'll get into that more later on because there's some important things if you're gonna walk down the road to deepening your faith. There's some important things you have to do. But what I want you to know is that I don't just believe this because the Bible told me. I believe it because coming out of that season where I tore apart my faith, God rebuilt it in a way that was so much stronger than it was before. I knew in my head who God was before that, but God showed me who he was in a way that I had never experienced. And it moved from my head to my heart in that year. And it moved to a place where in the years since, have I had my doubts? Yes, but those doubts are fleeting thoughts. They no longer sit and stir in my soul. They no longer mess with me. Because I'm firmly able to say in my season of doubt, God showed up in a way that I never could have imagined. And I had read about him, but in that season, I experienced him as I took my doubt to him. And he built me up stronger than I ever was before. And so what I want you to know today is that if you're a person who doubts, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. There's a road forward. You don't have to lose your faith because of your doubt. You don't have to watch doubt tear it apart. You can get to a place where when you look back, you're able to say, thank God that I had that doubt because now I have a faith that is so much stronger than any I had before. And over the next three weeks, what I want to do is teach you how to walk down the road that leads to deepening, not the road that leads to destruction. So, if you doubt, welcome to the club. If you doubt, I want to invite you to go on this journey with me the next 3 weeks. If you have doubts, if you have things that you're like, why, I'm not sure about all this, I'm not going to be able to answer every question during the next 3 weeks. I'm not. And to be honest, I don't have answers to every question. There are things that just require faith. But what I can tell you is that in those moments, God will meet you if you walk down the right road. And so that's my invitation to you, to walk down that road with me these next few weeks and to find a faith that is deeper, more meaningful, and stronger than anything you think possible today. Let's pray.